Hello everyone, my name is Adrien Beaupre and I'm here to talk to you about an extract from our brand new course, Security 460. But more importantly, the primary topic of the course, which is how to perform threat and vulnerability assessments in organizations that face enterprise scale issues. You may have 1,000 users, but deal with things on enterprise type basis. You may have 100,000 users and have scale issues or management of IT and security issues to deal with. So first off, explaining the title. So it's first off the extract from the course title, the Enterprise Threat and Vulnerability Assessment course at SANS 460, but also finding struts. Hopefully still topical after under a year, whereby an organization that had fairly interesting data were breached, and they were breached because they couldn't find struts, which means there may have been some interesting failures of controls, some interesting failures to identify threats, some interesting failures to identify vulnerabilities, and more so, how to manage those things at scale. So that's one of the primary topics of this course. So here's our roadmap. Day 1 is methodology. Day 2 is applying the methodology, doing discovery, taking your threat model and planning and rolling it into your enterprise environment in a strategic and controlled manner, performing scanning, automation, validation, remediation reporting, and exercise. So this again is just the synopsis of the course roadmap. And here on day 1 on the right side, we see the topics we'll cover throughout that day on day 1. So this is just a little bit of a synopsis and an extraction from this course talking about some of the more important topics of day 1. And again, rolling back to, whoops, sorry, yep.
You gotta take off the...
My screen is paused. Kelly, you forgot to remind me. There we go. See, I'm on slide 2 talking about slide 2, and you are looking at slide 1.
Sorry about that, Adrien.
Oh, that's okay. No major fail on my part. Bad instructor. Bad instructor. So here's my roadmap on the left and the day 1 roadmap on the right, which you can actually see now, which is good. So course roadmap and daily roadmap for day 1. Where does this course fit into the overall curriculum? So first off, it is part of the Pentest curriculum, a little bit to gain that sexy kind of, Pentest veneer or approach. So we're in this Pentest curriculum, but really vulnerability assessment is the basic skill set of almost any enterprise security roadmap, whereby without a vulnerability assessment, without enumeration of threats and threat modeling, you really have a very difficult time building up your roadmap of how to approach these issues across enterprise. So it fits in with the Pentest curriculum as one of the more basic courses, not because it's not a technical course, but because it's very foundational. It's a required skill set for other things. It also fits in with the Blue Team curriculum. We do talk about mitigation, we talk about remediation, we talk about management at scale, we talk about methodology, all the things that build out the Blue Team and the defensive roadmap. So it's not strictly speaking just a offensive course. It's not strictly speaking a defensive course. It's also not strictly speaking a technical course. It's also a management course, which makes it one of the more interesting courses at SANS in where it fits into the curriculums. So here's the premise. We have a lot of stuff. Most organizations have 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, perhaps even 200,000 nodes or endpoints in their environment. Now the question becomes, how do we assess them? You could try and scanning all 200,000 nodes at once, and you discover that'll probably take several years. You may also discover you have vulnerabilities in places you didn't even know about. This is problematic. So we talk about how defending at scale, how to automate and provide the tools, tactics, and techniques required to manage and implement such a program at scale in enterprise. Where enterprise, again, is any environment that has systems, whether it be 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, and have a need to manage and automate. So our objective is to try and extract all these types of issues across a variety of different industries, types of organizations, industrial control systems, educational, military, government, commercial, between myself and my co-authors Tim Medine and Matt Toussaint, we've each got a variety of different backgrounds. Myself, mostly private sector, but some federal government. Matt from a military point of view, and Tim also a lot of private sector work. So how to find vulnerabilities, how to do false positive reduction, often described as one of the most significant issues in industry, false positive. I'm going to suggest false positives are not that difficult to identify and reduce. All you need is analysts. Analysts know what they're doing. But the flip side, false negative. This is really the thing that bites industry today and organizations of any scale, and I'm not just talking private sector, but also government. How do you know what you don't know? Or how do you know your tool did what it's supposed to do? How do you know you're actually running your tool correctly? How do you know you're even covering the endpoints and issues you really wish to get into? So false negative is you didn't even see it. Then, of course, how to analyze these things, right? Data management is a significant issue at scale. What do you do with all the data you collect from all these different parts of your environment, and how do you prioritize it and then work at scale? So we're going to talk through all these issues throughout the course. Again, this is just the brief synopsis. So we have a focus on vulnerability assessment at scale, but it's not from the point of view of doing penetration testing or exploitation. It's from the point of view of essentially identifying risk and then associating that with adapting to how do you mitigate that risk appropriately at scale as well. So I keep using the word scale, right? And automation, it's key because running a one-off assessment is fine unless there is no change. So we have to be able to report and brief upwards the required changes in the appropriate way, and talk about architectural and procedural policy and technology changes required to properly defend an enterprise. So it's not just about attack. Almost essentially part of this course is how does attack technique inform and adapt our defensive mechanisms, or more appropriately put, how do we allow red to inform blue how to defend correctly? I often consider this, the first part of a purple course, because this course is not about exploitation, right? Exploitation is a given. In many cases, it can be done, but penetration testing is interesting because that exploitation is not necessarily desirable, right? It can have very negative impact in many environments. Exploitation is also really not necessarily going to give you much in some environments. Any places where, a port scan could have very, very severe impact, that would be a bad thing. So how do you identify vulnerabilities in these environments without penetration testing, without exploitation, in some cases without sending packets? So we're going to focus on the many other aspects, the many other techniques to extract information on vulnerability, threats, and risk, and then how to fold that into reporting mitigation. As well, so how to be truly purple. This is a thing that's come up. I actually resisted like any new term coming up, right? Like cloud and cyber. So what is purple? So purple in my mind is taking the techniques and the attacks and all of the things happening throughout the world, all the bad things that are happening, and adapting defensive techniques to the techniques used by the red, by the attackers. So it's a defensive course where we talk about the hacking, and we're not doing hacking. It's not a pen test course, right? This is taking the hacking techniques that are being used and using them to guide our way forward. One of the other key things here is, the bottom 2 points. Not all threats are external. Too many of our security mechanisms face outwards and don't acknowledge or address the fact that in many cases, there are internal aspects to many of our threat actors, threat actions, and activities. And, sometimes the business can accept risk. That's one of the things I've had a problem with in my career. Do they really know about the risk? Do they truly understand the risk they're accepting? And are they at the appropriate level of responsibility to accept that risk? So all these things are the management techniques, the technical aspects, the red and blue aspects of this course. So the requirements. The requirements for any vulnerability assessment are telling a compelling story. Not just a story, but a compelling story that allows an organization to have change, a way forward. Too many organizations have this cultural, almost, I don't know what to call it, layer 8 aspect, where they're political and cultural, and many of their parts of their environment are just against change. And I think we have to be able to describe an attack in a way that change is not just necessary, but is desirable, because we have to move against momentum against us for security. You know, over the past 15 years, parts of industry have come to realize that security cannot be about saying no. Too many years, the security industry has been about saying no, no Wi-Fi, no to iPads, no to what, this, that, the other. So now we've come to realize, okay, we want to be part of the solution. We want to be part of the activity. We have to define security requirements and become part of the organizational culture that allows and adapts for change. So, quick 101, what's a threat? Well, a threat is, you know, that person, that organization, that thing that can have an impact on us. And we have to know about these threats. We have to gather information about them and their capabilities, their intent, their opportunities, all those things, their resourcing, their timing, right? If they have lots of time on their hands, lots of resources, lots of capability, at some point they may be successful. It's our job to identify those possibilities, those probabilities, and to enact, right? Enact a defensive capability. This is part of what we do when we do a threat and vulnerability assessment. Gather threat intelligence. You know, it's a totally separate course, but these are really important aspects of what we do. Then what is risk? Risk is a funny word because it means completely different things to different people and organizations. I fly in airplanes on a regular basis. I, in fact, also drive a car. One is a riskier activity than the other. Driving a car is way riskier, and yet I do it all the time. Now, how do we take risk and apply it to different organizations? One comment I had on this course was that it's hard to describe an enterprise because it means different things. And in fact, risk, means different things to every single one of those enterprises. So we have to describe what is a threat to the enterprise? What is the probability of that threat becoming an active attack? What is the impact? How do we describe mitigating these techniques? So there's many ways to do this. There's no one way, but we've described what we consider our methodology for performing a vulnerability assessment correctly. So we've come across a variety of methodologies out there. We've synthesized and adapted them to our own way of looking at things. So this is our enterprise vulnerability assessment framework, where we walk through planning, threat modeling, discovery, scanning, validation, remediation, and reporting, knowing full well that the last three, validation, remediation, reporting, can be a loop. And it's hopefully a positive feedback loop where each of the three become built into perhaps a vulnerability management system. So let's get back to Adrien. Why are we talking about Struts? Well, in March of 2017, there's an advisory, and it was received by Equifax. Sometimes I call them Equifax, sometimes I call them Equihacks. They got the email and they passed it around internally to the teams within the environment in charge of vulnerability management. They scanned for Struts on the 15th of March. Here's what's funny. They didn't find it. And my thought was, how is that possible that they didn't know they used Struts? How is it possible that they used a scanner and didn't find it? So that's going to be the rest of the talk, is how is that possible and what does that mean? And how would you find Struts or the equivalent in your environment? Now, the rest of the story, of course, is quite interesting. In late July, they noticed suspicious traffic leaving their environment. 30th of July, they saw it again, and they took the application offline. It was not the primary application for Equifax. It was a secondary application used for people to contest their credit score. Now, the intrusion, we know, was on or about the 13th of May. So the questions here are, one, how did they not find struts? 2, how did they not notice all of that data leaving? And 3, what could they have done? I'm going to suggest a properly done assessment would likely have helped. Let's back that up though. One of the things about applications is many of the automated scanners don't do such a very good job of identifying vulnerabilities in web apps. Why do I say that? Well, you take your common scanners and you point them at an IP address and they don't find apps. They find, by the way, Apache, the web server, has a vulnerability, but they don't necessarily explore the application, identify issues in the application. So here's where the story gets more interesting. This particular vulnerability in Struts 2, first off, what's Struts? Well, Struts is a platform for developing applications. You use Struts to build an app, you then compile it and publish it. If there's a vulnerability in the underlying framework that you use to make your application, there's a high probability your application inherits that issue. So any and all application that uses Apache Struts 2 at this time was vulnerable. Now, here's what's interesting. During a file upload attempt, an attacker may gain the ability to execute arbitrary commands based on content type, content disposition, or content length values that are explicitly modified to contain attacker code. So 3 things there. The first is a red herring. File upload attempts leads you to believe that only parts of code that allow file uploads are vulnerable. This is in fact not true. Any part of a Struts application can invoke the file upload functionality. So that functionality may be called by parts of the application that don't actually allow a file upload. Second part, execute arbitrary commands. I don't know about you, that sounds bad. CVSS v3 score of a perfect 10 kind of backs that up. So modifying content length, content disposition, or content type values. Now that's of interest. So what you do is you put in values in those fields, their header fields in HTTP, that deliberately cause error handling to occur. They cause the error. Here's what's weird. You cause the error by injecting a particular language of code called OGNL. As it happens, the code inside Apache that does the error handling reflects or sends back the part of the message that caused the error into the error response. Here's the really interesting part. The error response code is parsed and processed by OGNL on the server. So you inject something that causes the error that is then reflected into part of the application code that will run code for you. Huh, interesting. So that's the kind of gory details of the Struts exploit. So if you have an application that uses Struts, this would be fairly seriously bad news. Here's the weird thing. How did they not know? So on March 15th, they did scans. They did not identify any systems running any version of Apache Struts vulnerable to this particular exploit. And the vulnerability remained in Equifax longer than it should have. This is taken from the congressional hearings on the Equifax exploit. They went public in September as to the exploit and the compromise occurring. In any case, I won't get into that in any great depth. My question still is, how did they not know? How could you scan your environment and not find this framework? And I'm going to do an exercise, a demo fairly shortly, that will show you it's actually not that hard to miss this stuff if you're not sure what you're looking for. What do I mean by that? Well, most of your vulnerability scanners don't scan applications, they scan servers or endpoints or desktops or workstations. That's what they do. Now, if you took an application scanner and pointed it at your web servers, it would probably find the application because it knows more about how to do that. Whereas your common vulnerability scanners for endpoints don't actually know how to do that very well. So I did some testing And I had some thoughts on how Equifax could have possibly dealt with this beforehand. Now, it's super easy to be an armchair quarterback or a backseat driver. You may or not be correct. And in fact, after the fact, right, it's really easy to say, well, you should have done A, B, C, D, E, F. So let's look at this. Did they do a proper threat model? You're Equifax, you're on the internet, you're probably going to be attacked. So is there a risk? I'm going to say yes. Categorically, yes. There's threats, there's risks. You're Equifax, you're on the internet, you have apps, right? Could they and should they have done vulnerability assessments of the applications? I'm going to suggest yes. And I'm going to suggest that perhaps they did not do so, or they did not do so correctly. But almost more fundamentally, if you develop apps in Struts, how could you not know that, right? Where's your change management, configuration management, dependency management? Where's your documentation on this application? Now, it's possible, I don't actually know, that the application was written by a third party. Someone else wrote it, they used it, and did not know Struts was there. In which case, why did that third party not advise them that Struts was in there? Or did they write it themselves and just didn't know? Good question. I actually don't know the answer to that. So threat modeling, risk assessments, vulnerability assessments, change management, configuration management, dependency management of your applications, all critical things that there's some evidence they may not have done correctly. Asset categorization, data classification. Now you can argue Equifax as a company, their client is not us. Their client are banks, where they sell us as a product. So they may classify our data as not being super important, although under GDPR and other PII, personally identifiable information, and other privacy regulations, that's probably not true. But internet-facing application that may have access to fairly important data, you would say that asset would be categorized as being fairly critical in most organizations. Next point, why did the credit scoring adjudication server have access to all our data? Next point, why was it not encrypted? Third point, they apparently did not monitor inbound because there were signatures for the Struts attack, or outbound because there's exfiltration of a large amount of data. I'm going to guess their operations center does not do threat hunting. Now, all of these are just assumptions. I actually don't know. I don't work for Equifax. I've never done any work for any of the organizations who've done work there. But this is my observation that these are some of the things that they may not have done correctly or could have done more correctly, more properly. I'm just saying. So this whole Struts thing, how many bugs were there in 2017? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bugs in Struts 2, one of them in Struts 1, which is quite ancient. 5 remote code execution vulnerabilities in 1 year. Now, I know full well, having worked with organizations' development groups, that once you find a platform or a framework for creating applications, you do not often update it. Fair enough. But I'm going to suggest if there are 5 massive bugs in 1 year within the time frame we're talking about, you may wish to do an update if you know it's there. It still comes back to me and still strikes me, how could you not know that? So let's take a look at this. I set up a Struts server, just install Tomcat and copied over a file, a Struts application, into the correct directory. I did not publish it, which I'll talk about in a sec, and I ran a scanner, and it said, not vulnerable. And I'm looking at it going, I talked to my software. That, I know. So I'm talking to this Python script saying, what do you mean it's not vulnerable? And it says, well, it's not vulnerable. And I'm like, how's that possible? I know it's vulnerable because the application I put there is vulnerable to all 5 of those exploits from 2017. It, in fact, is called Showcase. And the Showcase application, written by Struts people at Apache, showcases and shows you all of the features of Struts. And the one from January of 2017, with all those features, has all of those vulnerabilities in it. So first off, I did not publish the application and push it to the root directory. So this particular application hits the root directory, slash, and asks slash, hey, do you have struts? And the slash directory says no. But this particular Python script does not ask for subdirectories. Therefore, it doesn't find the application. So it's not really Python script's fault. It's a way that this server was particularly configured kind of on purpose by me, that the application was not that easy to find. You had to know at least one more thing. So you had to know where the application is. So in this case, if you know the application is called Showcase, you put in your browser struts.sec460.org:8080/showcase, and then you hit the application. And you hit the application, you notice the .action thing on the end, right? The .action means you're hitting struts 2. So if I hit a .action, that's a fairly good indicator that I'm hitting actual struts 2 code. So if I take that URL, I can feed it to two things. First, I can feed it to my Python script in hopes that it will see struts and go, hey, you're vulnerable, and then run the exploit. But as importantly, Nmap is one of my go-to tools for running this type of check across a large number of systems. Let's say 10,000 web servers. So I'll take one small check, the check to see if struts is there, and feed it a number of names of systems to test, and it will hopefully find the struts2 thing and show me the ones that are vulnerable. So I'm going to take that URL and feed it to those two tools. Here's what's interesting. I feed it to Nmap first without the directory name, and it doesn't find it. That's where I put the little snip there at the top. Then I put in the directory, and it says, yes, you are vulnerable. So here's what's funny. If I put in bare bones, just the minimum amount of information to make the script work, it doesn't work. It comes back false negative. Similar to the one I showed you earlier with struts.pwn. False negative, it says not vulnerable. If you research in that particular script the NSE file, it says, oh, you should use --script-args and put in the whole directory and file name of where struts is. If you get that far, then you run it and boom, it finds it. And I'm going to actually demo this for you fairly shortly. Last time, of course, I run struts.pwn with a fairly benign command, the ID command, which is basically what is your ID number, and it works. If I put in the full path to the directory and file name where struts is, as I showed you earlier, if you don't put that in, it says you are not vulnerable. So this is demo time. I'm going to fire up my Struts app. I'm going to point the two files against it, the Nmap file and the struts.pwn file, and show you exactly how it is that perhaps, again, I don't know for a fact, perhaps this is how they missed it. They ran a general purpose scanner against the IP address. It did not hit the application, and therefore did not invoke struts, and therefore did not find the vulnerability. A point for my friend Ted. You know, when you do a demo, it's fairly high risk. Things may go badly. So you're supposed to sacrifice a virgin goat. However, you know, I guess virgin goats are fairly scarce, perhaps where I live or where I often are. So there's no virgin goat. I just hope the demo gods are okay with me running a demo right now. I'm going to switch over to my VM, little Linux VM, where I have the two files I'm going to use. The first is this guy. That is the NSE script, the Nmap scripting engine script that allows me to scan and hopefully find struts. So I'm going to run sudo nmap -- script. This guy. Oh, I missed the O on sudo. Sudo, this is what happens when you do demos. You have to take a look at what you're typing. I'm going to tell it which port, -P 8080. I'm going to say it is on struts.sec460.org, my server. Notice I'm not going to tell it which directory to run it against. It's going to ask me for my password. And it's going to run, and right in between there is where it should say something like, by the way, you are very, very vulnerable. Let's see what happens when you go to port 8080. This is a web browser. Just go to Struts, and I hit 8080, and what do I hit? I hit this Tomcat thing, because I have not correctly published the app and done this stuff down at the bottom that says installing the applications, blah, 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 right? I didn't do that. Let's say I have like 10 applications installed, and you have to know the directory, and you hit /showcase. Notice two things happened. One, it added the slash, right? It said, oh, you don't want the file called showcase, you want a directory. Then hitting the directory says, oh, you don't just want the directory, you want the default file in that directory, in this case, showcase.action. So I'm running a proxy here to show you what I mean. So I hit slash right there, showcase, no slash at the end. It said, oh, you know what you want? You want to put a slash on the end, you want the directory. Then my browser says, oh, you're right, I do want slash at the end. And then you put in slash on the end, and you know what you get? Oh, you don't want just slash, you want showcase.action. Then your browser goes, oh, you're right, that's what I actually want. I want the .action file. Then a bunch of stuff happens. This implies back here, running this NSE script does not follow the redirect. It says, I want the root directory, and then gets back something from Tomcat, and then Nmap gives up. So let's do what I should have done. Put in --script -args, and I'm going to cheat, go back, look at the syntax. In the PDF, boop, boop, there we are, nope. Path equals, so I need a path equals. I'm going to do it wrong the first couple times on purpose to show you, right? So --path equals quote /showcase quote. So I'm not going to put in the secondary slash or showcase.action. Nothing. Put in the second slash. Nothing. Put in the full name of an actual action file. Oops, that means I did something wrong. --path equals showcase. Oops, that means I did something wrong. No --. That's my syntax error. Just path equals script args, no --. So I'm going to repeat that this way, as I should have in the first case. Doesn't work. Put in a slash. Doesn't work. Put in what should work. Boom. Isn't that funny? So this particular scripting engine, if you give it no slash for the directory, it does not follow. You put in a slash for the directory, it does not follow. You put in the full URL with the full name, it says, oh, there it is. This is a feature of Nmap that you have to know when you're scanning for this type of thing at scale. If you don't hit the actual .action file, you get nothing. Also, a reminder that you have to really know the syntax of your command fairly well. Let's look at the other guy, struts-pwn. It says -h for help. It says it wants -u for URL. I'm going to say struts.sec460.org :8080. And that didn't work. Let's see what's going on. Check that for me, please. It says not vulnerable. All right, let's try the trick I tried before, /showcase. It says not affected, /showcase/. Oh. So this Python script knows in the second case, it got a single redirect and said, by the way, go check showcase.action. But when it received the double redirect without the slash, it didn't follow it. Let's put in the full one. Any of the action files, and it finds it vulnerable. So that's the vulnerability assessment mode --check. Let's exploit it. And it runs the ID command, which is fairly benign. However, your mileage may vary running actual exploit code in an environment that is not a test environment. So what does this actually mean? What is Adrien showing us here? If you run a general purpose scanning tool looking for application issues in enterprise, you will possibly miss them. If you run application-specific tools that are misconfigured, you may also miss them. Let's apply this back to Equifax. Did they run a scanning tool? Did they run it correctly configured for that application? Now, if I'm, say, scanning 10,000 systems and I miss one particular one, you know, that happens. If I'm scanning what is probably a fairly critical internet-facing application and I miss something like that, I'm going to say I'm less understanding because, you know, you should probably find that stuff. So going back to my slides, here's the first example where I don't find it, the second example where I do. And I repeated that with Struts Pwn. I also repeated this with Nessus and Nexpose, now inside VM. Same thing happens. Nessus and Nexpose do not find the vulnerability. Acunetics and AppScan, which are application-specific scanners given only :8080, do not find it. Given the first directory, showcase, do find it, unless they're in directory brute forcing mode, in which case they do find it, but I have to configure it that way.
Hey, Adrien, we got a quick question from Jay.
Absolutely.
So what would happen if you used in a wildcard, the star symbol?
In which one? Because it would matter. So, for example, you mean like here? If I put in a wildcard, it would have to be a wildcard that Python would understand and be able to interpret into the correct HTTP URL. So let's say I put a star, right? This will not work. Oh, it does work. Interesting. Cool. Wonder what happens if I leave out the slash. It does not work if you leave out the slash. Interesting. Honestly, Jay, I'd never tried that before, because I wouldn't know how the PY file would interpret it, but it does interpret it correctly. I wonder about the nmap.
And then follow-up question from Wardell. Where did you get the Python script?
I literally Googled the CVE, and it's the first one that came up. And I did not run it in production. To answer the next question, these are all test environment systems that I've set up specifically for this test. That one particularly is fairly benign, and I've looked through the code, so I wouldn't be too worried about it really doing serious mess up. But you know, production environments can be interesting. So I would caveat emptor. So Jay, to answer your question, the wildcard would have to be something that's understood by your scanner tool. And the more common way of addressing that is to use a directory brute force, meaning take a listing of common directories of application names and have that appended after every host name and every port number to try and find. That's how most scanners do that. Instead of a wildcard or globbing, they use a brute force list of directories to go looking for. Acunetics, AppScan, and WebInspect, and OWASP Zap all have that type of feature. In Zap, it's called Dirbuster. So I want to go back into marketing mode for a moment. The next, or actually the very first public run of 460, the Enterprise Threat Vulnerability Assessment course, of which this is an extract, will be run in Pittsburgh coming up in the end of July. That's the very first run. It will, of course, go out to general production and be available. It is also going to be in EMEA fairly shortly in London. It's also going to be, in Berlin. It's also going to be in APAC in Australia this year. So we're rolling it out to all venues in all modes. We're going to go into, for example, on-demand and VLive, also hopefully towards the end of this year. Are there any other questions?
I think you just answered this, but Scott asked if it's going to be in VLive this year, and I think you said at the end of the year, hopefully.
We are certainly hoping to be in VLive in 2018, yes.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask in the questions window, and I'll ask Adrien. Adrien, I have a question for you. When you're dealing with a large organization, what is, the people listening right now, what would be a first step to putting together a maturing vulnerability assessment program?
Absolutely, excellent question. So the first step towards having a vulnerability assessment program is prioritization. You cannot scan it all. You should not scan it all. Only scan those systems that are important to you and prioritize them, triage them. Same with the information coming from the scanners. Prioritize and triage findings. You cannot address them all. You cannot scan it all. Enterprises are too big.
And then a follow-up question to that is, when you start conducting scanning, is there a potential for breaking things? And if so, as you're breaking things, do you have like a percentage of things that if they break, I'm okay with that? Or is it?
Yes, that's a very good question. So when you're scanning, are there things that are going to break? Absolutely. People often ask, can we guarantee in the assessment that we will not break things? And the answer is no. Almost double dog guarantee things will go down, bad things will happen. In particular in application space, applications will start to die. As well, printers, IoT, PLCs, FPGAs, industrial control systems, SCADA, HMIs, all this stuff's going to die if you scan it. Bad things will happen. So what's acceptable? One environment where we had 100,000 laptops and 250,000 nodes in one big flat network. When we started doing updates and pushing out scans, anything under 10% we considered okay. And that was our rule of thumb. Or anything that caused a 10% increase in help desk calls was considered oops.
So that brings up a good follow-up question. When you're doing these assessments, is there like people that you're coordinating with, the help desk people, management, the direct supervisors of a certain place that's being scanned to make sure that the people know that things could break and this is who you call?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So scanning should not be a surprise. Unlike, for example, red team or pen test activities, only certain people should be in the know. Web application and enterprise vulnerability assessments, everyone should be in the know. They should be announced, they should be monitored, they should be done during specific hours with specific windows of time. Yeah, everyone should know.
Awesome. I have a question here from Wardell, and if you have questions, feel free to ask. What commercial vulnerability systems did you say missed this vulnerability that you were discussing? Did you say both Nessus?
Nessus and Nexpose, both of them. I'm equally opportunity critical of commercial tools.
Thank you. And then I have one more question, unless anyone else has anything. In the course, are people going to get anything to take with them, any of these tools, or are they going to be taught the tools in the course?
So two things, yes, some of the tools we're allowed to distribute. So in the course VM, which is Windows 10 based, we have installed a number of these tools already in the VM, which we're allowed to distribute. Those tools that we're not allowed to distribute due to licensing, we show you how to use them, and then those same tools, techniques, and methodology should be implemented or implementable in any of them.
Okay. I don't see any. Well, I have one more. It says from Walt, I may have missed it already, but is there planned to be a certification associated with this course?
Other excellent question. We're hoping early next year. So like any brand new SANS course, it depends a little bit on the popularity of the course, but once we become a little bit popular, we almost always get a certification.
I have a question from Scott. If you were to pick a vulnerability management product today, who would you recommend?
The one that meets your requirements. Oh, Adrien, that's a cop-out question. So build a requirement set for your vulnerability management assessment project, and it usually becomes really clear really quickly which one meets your requirements. Some of them, there's really two that stand out, and I have no preference between either of them.
Also, we just did a webcast on the 7th called Maximizing Your Tool Set. That could give you a good framework for trying to figure out which tool that you need and which ones you currently have that you could use. All right. There are no more questions. Adrien, do you have any final words before we end this podcast?
Thanks for coming out, and thanks for spending some time with me. I try not to take up the whole hour of your time, and please come check out our stuff. We are very happy and very, very responsive to feedback for 460 or SANS in general, or pen testing or vulnerability assessment in general. It's a brand new course. We're very excited, and we're really hoping that the tactics, tools, techniques, and methodologies that we try and teach are easy things you can take home, back to the job, and deploy as soon as you get back.
And Wardell, it's a great demo. Loved it. Thanks. Thank you, Wardell, for tuning in. All right, Carol, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Adrien, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.